So once again, happy Father's Day, and I hope that you've, dads, grandparents, male carers, whatever you are, have received some really awesome gifts this morning. For Father's Day, my wife went out to buy me a pair of camouflage pants, but couldn't find any.
A pair of camouflage pants.
I actually said for Father's Day, I want a present without any strings attached. So my daughter bought me a broken guitar. Is it getting any better? My son actually bought me a book on anti-gravity, but now I can't put it down.
I recommend that.
I could go all day. The thing is, my kids just sit there and they smile and shake their heads, but I laugh because they can't do anything about it. It's stuck with me. Being Father's Day, I thought it'd be appropriate to share some of my favourite jokes. If you would have worked out, there's actually not 25 jokes there, there's 24 jokes. That was a joke on you, by the way. I've always said I never wanted to grow up. I always wanted to stay a big kid, and I'm not sure, don't answer that question, okay, whether I've actually succeeded. I never wanted to grow up, I always wanted to be a big kid. And it's getting harder as I get older, or getting harder since my hair's now gone grey. Once upon a time, I'd just mess around and be silly, and random strangers would just look at you and think you're just weird. But now these days they just smile at me. It's like the thing with grey hair, you go in the checkout or something like that, and I just chat and make up random things, and they just smile at you like, oh, you're a nice old man. Smile at you. They get away with it. They just think I'm going senile or nuts. And anyways, so this morning, maybe considering all that, maybe I'm preaching to myself, because this morning we're talking about maturity, more specifically Christian maturity. And actually, when I started preparing for this message, I didn't realise that the Bible, New Testament particularly, says so much about Christian maturity. And in fact, I had another message planned for today, but I thought that it wasn't quite right for Father's Day. So I'm doing a part 1 today. You get part 2 next week. Part 2 is sitting on the shelf, maturing. And so I'll get back to that. You'll get to hear that next week. Who here loves babies? Some people are just really into babies. A few of you. Some people they're kind of cute, kind of. Unless they're my children. They're grown up to be beautiful now. But babies, as much as they, cute and adorable and all that kind of thing, they can't remain babies forever, can they? They must grow up and mature to become fully grown adults. Well, that's the same with believers. When we're born again as Christians, we start our journey as baby Christians, babies in the faith. But there is an expectation in the Bible that we will grow up and mature, become mature Christians. The problem is, so many of us just want to keep on remaining babies. I think that's our problem. I often talk about why do Christians and sometimes give Christianity such a bad name, whether it be on social media or whatever it might be. Sometimes we give ourselves a really bad name, and it's because of a lack of, I think, maturity. And throughout the New Testament, the authors use various words to describe what maturity looks like at various stages of our faith walk. However, the meanings of these words from the original Greek are often lost in translation in our English Bibles. So I'm going to get into that a little bit more next week, but today I just want to look at a well-known story which is very appropriate for Father's Day. I want to look at the story of the Prodigal Son, and introduce this idea. So we're going to jump straight into it. Luke 15 we're looking at, 11 onwards. And we're just going to progressively go through it bit by bit. Jesus was talking to the crowd who were gathered, and he said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me a share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the youngest son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living, or extravagant living, as other versions say." I'm just going to pause there for a second. Although Jesus doesn't tell us what the specific amount that the father gave to each son, the custom of the day was that what would actually happen was that the youngest son would be given a third of the income from the property, 1/3. But the oldest son would be given 2/3 of the income. And that's actually a really important point to remember. It would also appear that the father still remained management of the property, even though he was technically still, technically it now was a possession of the oldest son. Now, for a son at that time to expect his father to give him his inheritance while his father was still alive was incredibly rude and disrespectful. It was like saying or treating your father as if he's already dead. But yet, despite that, the father, in an act of grace, allows his son the freedom to make his own choices, allowing his property and wealth to be divided between his two sons. But in another act of total disrespect, the youngest son then goes and takes everything he's got, leaving nothing behind, and walks out. It's like, I'm done, I'm turning my back on you. I'm turning my back on my father, I'm done, I'm out of here, I'm going to make my own life. And off he goes. So we pick up on verse 14. And after the youngest son spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country. And he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of the country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. So we see two disasters occur here. Two disasters. One was of his own causing, that was he spent all his money. And the other one was that there was a famine, obviously outside of his hands. But the famine actually meant that it made it very difficult for this young man to actually find a job. So he was obviously quite desperate, because if you would know, Jews would have nothing to do with pigs, right? And for him to actually go and work to feed pigs shows just how desperate he was for money. Because that would have been the most degrading and shameful job. But it also appears that no one actually came to help him or came to his need. Maybe they felt like, maybe they'd seen him spend his money and be like really flippant with his money, and they thought he deserved to wallow with the pigs, I don't know. But no one came out to help him. And desperate and hungry, he came to his senses. It's interesting that it often takes like a disaster or something really bad to happen in our lives for us to come to our senses, doesn't it? It's like when the life actually hits us a real hard blow and we're on our knees, we suddenly go, oh, this is what I've done. This is how I've messed up my life. And we finally realise some of our poor choices. And it's true in this story too. Only in his desperation does this youngest son come to his senses. And so we pick up again. It says, and he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and he went to his father. Now we see here the son's actual confession of sin, right? First against his sin against heaven, to God, and second against his father for dishonouring him and turning his back on him. And recognising that he no longer had the right to be called his father's son, he returned home with the hope of just being a servant, just a hired help. But it says, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The Greek literally says, and the father fell on the neck of the son, literally like threw himself onto him, which reveals something of the father's love. And the fact that the father saw his son from a long way off tends to suggest that the father had been waiting patiently. Like, you see someone from far off, it's not like you notice them and pay much attention to them, right? But the fact that he noticed him tends to suggest that he's actually been sitting there patiently waiting for his father to return. His son to return. The father waiting for the son to return. And the fact that there was actually some distance involved, some people have suggested that meant that he was actually, the father had to go to another town. So maybe the young man was actually coming through a town into the property. And so here's the father seeing this son, goes running out to see him, to greet him, filled with compassion. Now, for an older man in those days, in that particular period of time, it was disgraceful for him to run. And the reason why is that he would have to lift up his robes and bare his legs. Maybe they didn't have nice legs back then. But anyway, he had to bare his legs. And that would have been a really shameful thing, especially if he did it in a public space. Yet it appears that the father actually does not care. It's like he's so focused on his son, and he just runs out to greet him, filled with immense love and compassion. And the father, instead of prioritising his own pride and honour, he looks out for his son's well-being and acceptance and public honour. I mean, just the fact that the father greets him, like he could have just stood a bit of a distance. I mean, people would have been in the town judging this young man for what he's actually done. And the fact that the father goes out and embraces him actually shows to everyone around him, he is my son still. He's still my son, who I love. It goes on, the son said to the father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. So the robe, the ring and the sandals are actually really quite significant. So by placing a robe on the son, it signified it was a sign of position. The ring signified authority, and the sandals indicated that he was no longer a slave, but a free man. All in all, this signalled to the son that he was welcomed home. He was actually part of the family once more. And it's important to note that despite the son's rejection of the father never rejected the son. You know, the son may have turned away and turned his back and left and gone, nah, stuff you. But the father had never given up on the son. And when we consider this in light of our Christian faith, and in light of salvation, what does it say about us? What does it say about our Heavenly Father who loves us that much? He's never given up on us. No matter what we may have done, no matter how we may have treated him, he has never given up on us. There's always a welcome mat there for us to come home. He's waiting patiently for us. Now, the fatted calf would have been carefully looked after and set aside for a very special occasion, like a wedding. So the killing of this, as well as we'll read a bit later on, hired entertainers to provide music and dancing as part of a celebration, symbolised a lavish, festive feast. This only emphasised the father's immense joy in welcoming the son back from what he considered is considered as a spiritual death. For his son was dead, but was now alive. He was lost, but is now found. Pick it up, verse 25. Meanwhile, the oldest son was in the field. When he came near to the house, he heard music and dancing, and he called one of the servants and asked him, "What's going on?" "Your brother has come home," he replied, "and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound." The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. Now, this is a very different reaction, isn't it? You think about the reaction of the father compared to the son. They're very, very different reactions, complete opposites. And in the context of this passage, you have to realise that this parable that Jesus is sharing was shared in front of the Jewish leaders at the time, who were grumbling about him welcoming and eating with strangers and tax collectors. So as he's sharing this, the crowd, the religious leaders, would have recognised themselves in this story as being the selfish ones, the angry son who failed to welcome outsiders and outcasts. But why was he so angry? You ever ask that question? Why was the oldest son so angry? The Greek literally says he was fuming. He was enraged. It's not just a bit grumpy. He's having a bit of a grumpy day. He was furious. Was he angry at his father for welcoming his brother back after all he put his father through? Or maybe he was angry at his brother for presuming, how dare you come back after what you've done? How dare you come back into the family? Perhaps it was both. I think it's sad, isn't it, that sometimes we take on board the hurt and frustrations of others. Hurt that is actually not ours to bear. I actually think my wife is a pretty amazing person. She's a very special person. And, when people, and I hope she doesn't, too late, I'm going to share it anyway. But when people are rude to her, she has this ability just to go, oh, that's okay. They're probably just having a bad day. I think that's a very special trait that I really value in my wife. Me, on the other hand, wants to take offence for her. I was like, no, you should take offence. But it's actually not my offence to take, is it? It's actually not mine to take. And yet sometimes this is what we do. Back to the older brother, I actually think that his anger has a lot to do with self-centeredness, which caused him to have nothing to do with the celebration. And it says, he answered his father, look, all these years, I have been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Look at me, Dad. Look at me. Look at what I've done. I've been on my knees and I've worked myself to the bone for you. For you. I've kind of forgotten the fact that he actually now owns the property and it was all going to him anyway. But I've done it for you. Look at me. He's having a bit of a sookie lala, isn't he? Yet you have never given a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, I love that, this son of yours, he doesn't even acknowledge him as his brother, this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because his brother, he calls him a brother, he's your brother. He's not this son of mine, he's your brother of yours, was dead, is now alive again. He was lost and is found. Have you ever noticed how people who get upset or offended or put out tend to exaggerate things or miss the blaringly obvious things that have been done for them or the opportunities given to them? Children tend to do this first, particularly if they've got, or do this when you've got siblings. The younger ones, I was a younger baby sibling, it was like, my brother always gets away with this. Why does my brother always get to do this? Why does my sister? Why? And I forget all the fact that all the amazing things that they've done for me, or that my parents have done for me, but it's always about, looking elsewhere, looking out because of his selfishness. In this case, when the oldest son accuses his brother of squandering his money on prostitutes. Where does it say that? Nowhere in the text does it say that. How could he possibly know this to be true? It only says that the youngest son spent his money on extravagant living, which could mean anything. So it appeared that the older brother is now making up some porky pies, exaggerating the truth a little, right? And secondly, the older brother missed the fact that he has always remained his father's son, in which his father was always with him, loving, caring, supporting, and providing for him. And finally, the oldest son accuses the father of not giving him anything like that of his brother. Hang on a minute. Let's go back to verse 12, where it makes it really clear that the father divided the property between his sons. The eldest son has already received his inheritance. In fact, if it was divided up according to the customs of the day, he's received 2/3, where the younger brother had actually only received 1. And in fact, everything that now remains is technically belongs to the older brother. He's got everything. And you hear he's doing this sook and going, but what about me? I'll start singing. What about me?
It isn't fair. And I want my share.
Next music night, Steve. So what does this parable teach us? Well, when we relate this parable to our salvation, it reveals just how amazingly profound our Heavenly Father's love is for us, right? And despite all that we have done, like turning our back on God, squandering our inheritance or our life on the worldly stuff, God's love is so great that he is willing to endure the pain, the shame, the disgrace by allowing his Son to die on the cross for us in our place. And in order to restore our relationship with him as his sons and daughters. And like the celebration that the Father throws, the party that the Father throws in this parable, when the Son returns home, just think, in heaven, every time someone comes to faith, there's a party that goes on. The party going on up here, a celebration that lasts through all the generations. How's that song go? There's a party goes on when people come to faith. But let's get back to my theme of what I was actually meant to be talking about. What does this have to do with Christian maturity? Well, the answer actually lies in two specific words, or key words, which are used to refer to the sons. In verse 11, both sons are referred to as hoios sons. I think it's up in here, hoios. We all say hoios. Hoios. Oh, that's very well done. Hoios. Make Greek scholars of you, Dad. Hoios refers to a mature son who shares the same nature of his father. He's a grown, mature man. A hoios son is one who is ready to inherit and take over his father's business and responsibilities. He has been given the legal authority to represent his father in all matters of business. And throughout the parable, the sons are referred to as hoios sons until verse 31, when the eldest son is referred to as a teknon son. I say teknon son. A teknon is an immature, a very immature child. So all the way through the parable, and at no point of time does it ever change for the youngest son. He's always called a hoios son. But then when we get to verse 31, when we're talking about the oldest son, he's now referred to as this immature child. So what's missed in translation is the fact that Jesus is actually calling the oldest son immature compared to the youngest son, despite the youngest son's inappropriate behaviour and actions. You know, I think that's because the youngest son acknowledges his mistakes. So it's not based on how many mistakes or that you do in life. I think that's really important. We go, oh, you're so immature, you made all these silly mistakes of your life, or you're still making mistakes as Christians. No, it's about your ability to recognise those mistakes. Your ability to actually acknowledge when you've done wrong and to go and repent and say sorry and make it right. Yeah? You've got no idea who I am. Also, he responded. So the youngest son also responded to the father's love and became dependent on him. Whereas we see with the oldest son is so caught up, or too caught up in himself and his own self-righteousness. Despite the appearance of being a good, faithful, hard-working young son, he's actually instead quite self-centered and failing to acknowledge his father, ongoing love and his and support and provision. This makes him immature. Does that make sense where I'm going with that? So as I said, sometimes we get caught up into this idea, this, we can be very accusative of people and go, oh, how immature are you? As I said, God's okay, he doesn't like it, but he's okay with us making mistakes. But it's about how you respond, and it's about whether or not you're willing to learn and grow as part of that. And how many times do you see Christians who are just so caught up in themselves, like, I'm so godly, I'm so righteous, I'm so perfect. Well, good on you if you want to aim to strive to be those things, but get over yourself. Get over yourself. You know, because often those people aren't so godly and righteous after all. You know, they have these blind spots about what their life is actually really like. So how do we apply this? Well, the challenge for us is the same that it was in Jesus' day for the audience he was speaking to then. Are you like the younger brother or the older brother? Now, we tend to see ourselves as the younger prodigal son and rejoice in the welcoming of God's love, which is great if you go on to make the appropriate response in love to God's invitation of grace. But let's be honest. Let's be really honest with ourselves. I'm sure there are times when we too reflect the behaviour of the older son. It's unfortunate that it's common as human beings to feel underappreciated. Has anyone ever felt underappreciated? I'm sure we all have. No one wants to admit to it now, do they? Thank you for my one person who's willing to be honest with themselves. Underappreciated. Or maybe you feel like you ought to have been recognised or credited more for the things that you have done. You know, it is hard when you do stuff and you work hard and all the credit goes elsewhere and you're like, what about me? What about me? We're back to that again. Yes. Or perhaps we even behave judgmentally towards those around us who fail to live up to our expectations. We become judgmental, or the expectations of the Bible and yours. Yes, I'm not saying we shouldn't hold each other accountable for our behaviour, but this whole judgmental of like, oh, that's not good enough. Are we behaving like the older son? Now, interestingly, Jesus in this parable does not conclude the story by telling us what happens next. Rather, he leaves the invitation open to us to decide. Are we endeavouring to behave like mature, pious sons and daughters? Or are we behaving like technon children? I'm going to leave that with you to consider and ponder. As I said, we all make mistakes. It's not about whether or not how much you stuff up and mess up in life. It's about how you respond. Yeah, I think it's actually more important.
Remember, if ever you miss one of our messages or services, you can always catch up by going to our website. There's a link there to our YouTube channel, and there you'll find all our recent messages, which will also include church news. Upcoming services. On Sunday the 14th of September, we'll have a service of celebration, and this will include Rev Kids. The speaker will be Pastor Rohan Buijs.
Empty nesters. That's those of you who no longer have children living at home. You have been invited to lunch at the Royal Mail Hotel. If you would like to attend, please contact Joe MacArthur or Mark Bovey.